Imagine one promise so big and so ambitious that it's sure to shift the paradigm of what games can even be. For years, that promise hung in the air, carried by countless previews, interviews, and trailers, each touting a sprawling future metropolis, a digital dream called Night City. The game was Cyberpunk 2077, and if you believe the hype, it'd be the defining RPG of a generation. You followed every trailer, each developer interview, and every single piece of new concept art. The developers promised an open world so immersive that you could smell the oil and neon, so deep you'd question your own morality, and so flexible that your choices would steer the fate of an entire faction. It was to be the ultimate playground for role players, the ultimate narrative tapestry for story lovers, and the ultimate technological showcase for those craving visual spectacle. When Keanu Reeves told fans they were breathtaking at E3, Cyberpunk seemed destined to set the new standards for the industry. But hype can be a dangerous force. By December 10th, 2020, expectations were already through the roof. People cleared their schedules, ready to step into Night City's neon embrace, and instead what they got was not a masterpiece, but a disaster. And when it finally released, it stumbled out of the gate. On powerful PCs, some players glimpsed greatness, detailed environments, memorable characters, intriguing quests. But even then, there are plenty of bugs. Characters were T-posing in the street, there are random crashes and dialogue cut out. And on last-gen consoles like the PS4 and Xbox, it was a mess. Frame rates plummeted, textures failed to load, and entire city blocks popped in and out of existence. Glitches turned immersion into frustration. There were cars floating through walls, NPCs repeated nonsensical lines, and quests broke. But instead of feeling like a digital dream, the game often felt like a nightmare. The aftermath left CD Projekt Red with the mammoth task of trying to regain trust with a player base that already felt utterly betrayed. What once seemed like a surefire triumph of game development now resembled an exercise in damage control. The studio released several public apologies, admitting they had rushed the release and failed to meet expectations, especially for players on older consoles. In a rare move for the industry, they encouraged players to seek refunds and outlined a roadmap for future improvements, promising to fix the game and ultimately make it right. The sincerity of these admissions, however, was met with skepticism. Words alone would not restore faith. The only currency of importance now was action. Over the next several months, hotfixes and patches sought to stabilize the crumbling experience. Most glaring issues were addressed, crashes occurred less frequently, quests became stable, and frame rates gradually improved. For PCs and newer consoles, things started inching their way towards acceptability. Bugs that had once completely derailed gameplay, like NPCs teleporting or crucial mission objectives failing to appear, were finally resolved. Yet, for many, these fixes felt too little, too late. After all, players had expected an industry-defining masterpiece, not a game that needed months of post-launch work to achieve basic functionality. But despite these hurdles, CD Projekt Red showed a commitment to listening to feedback and making meaningful changes. They stopped pretending everything was fine and instead openly communicated about the challenges they faced and the steps that they were taking to address them. Slowly, they began to rebuild a fragment of their trust that had been shattered. For those who had returned to the game out of curiosity, the improvements were noticeable. Even if the game still felt far from the ambitious vision that had once been promised, it had begun on the road to redemption, but it was clear that the path to complete recovery would be a long and arduous road. February 2022 marked a major turning point when CD Projekt Red finally released a long-awaited next-gen update for PS5 and Xbox Series X. The update leveraged more powerful hardware and allowed Cyberpunk 2077 to deliver an experience closer to what had been shown in its glossy trailers. Players on these platforms noticed significant improvements. Frame rates stabilized, textures loaded reliably, and graphical enhancements brought Night City's vibrant neon-drenched streets to life. For the first time since launch, technical scaffolding began to support the rich world building and storytelling that laid beneath the cracks. The next-gen update also brought quality of life improvements that addressed long-standing player frustrations. Driving mechanics, which had once felt clunky and unresponsive, were refined, making vehicle traversal through Night City's sprawling urban landscape more enjoyable. Combat mechanics saw updates that made the firefights and melee encounters feel tighter and more dynamic. AI behaviour, which was a major point of criticism at launch, received tweaks that made NPCs feel more responsive and believable in their interactions. Though the update couldn't entirely erase the scars of the game's troubled release, it marked a crucial step in making Cyberpunk playable, and even enjoyable on modern hardware. Around the same time, Cyberpunk Edgerunners, a Netflix anime set in the game's universe, reignited interest in the world of Night City. The series captured the emotional depth, tragedy and resilience of its cyberpunk setting in a way that resonated with both critics and audiences. It told a gritty, human story that showcased the potential of Night City as a rich, narrative playground. Many players who had abandoned the game or never tried it were drawn back in by the anime's success, finding a vastly improved version of the game waiting for them, a version with far fewer of the glaring issues that had marred its launch. A combination of major technical overhauls and renewed cultural relevance marked a shift in how Cyberpunk was perceived. The conversation around the game began to change, and instead of focusing solely on glitches and disappointments, players began discussing its storylines, characters, and ambitious world. While the gap between expectation and reality still loomed large, the groundwork for redemption had been laid. For many, the game was no longer a cautionary tale but a work in progress, one that, with enough time and effort, might finally fulfill its potential. Later in 2023, CD Projekt Red made their next big step towards redemption with the release of Phantom Liberty, a full-scale expansion that aimed to completely retool and improve the core experience. Unlike standard DLC, which often feel like optional extras, Phantom Liberty was designed to correct the systemic issues that had plagued the game since launch. It was an opportunity for CD Projekt Red to show that they had learned their lesson and could execute what was initially planned for the game. The expansion introduced a plethora of improvements, touching nearly every aspect of gameplay. Skill trees were redone, making progression more interesting and substantial, allowing players to craft truly unique character builds. Enemy AI was greatly improved, making combat encounters more challenging and rewarding. Night City itself became more dynamic, with enhanced crowd behaviours and environmental interactions giving the world a greater sense of life and unpredictability. Phantom Liberty also delivered a riveting new narrative focused on espionage and betrayal, featuring Idris Elba in a pivotal leading role. The story showcased the intricate branching storytelling that CD Projekt Red had always promised. With quests reacting to player choices in profound and sometimes unexpected ways, players found themselves grappling with moral dilemmas, uncovering hidden layers of the city's power struggles, and navigating alliances that felt genuinely impactful. For the first time, discussions around Cyberpunk shifted away from its technical flaws and focused on its story, characters, and richness of its world. The expansion didn't just add new content, it reshaped the game into something closer to the masterpiece that it was destined to be. For players who had stuck with the game through its rocky evolution, Phantom Liberty felt like a vindication of their patience. For those who had given it up or never tried, it was an invitation to return and see how far the game had actually come. Although the shine of its disastrous launch had dulled, Cyberpunk finally seemed on a path to gaining respect, even admiration, that once felt preordained. The story of Cyberpunk's recovery is not just about updates and expansions. It serves as a case study in how developers can rebuild trust by engaging with their community. CD Projekt Red recognized early on that silence or defensiveness would only deepen the rift with players, and instead they put out roadmaps for future updates, responded to player complaints in patch notes, and communicated openly about the challenges they faced. Admission of guilt and focus on tangible improvements spoke volumes towards accountability, softening some of the initial vitriol. Listening to player feedback became integral to this process, from better minimaps to subtle UI tweaks and long-requested fixes for quest-related bugs. These updates showed that developers were paying attention to what players wanted, and while these changes alone couldn't erase the memory of the launch, they helped restore a sense of respect for the player base. This began to shift the narrative around the game over time. And by late 2024, Cyberpunk has become a very different game from the one that launched in December 2020. For players experiencing it for the first time, Night City finally feels like the sprawling immersive world that had been promised years ago. Performance on modern consoles and high-end PCs are stable, with far fewer bugs or glitches to disrupt the experience. The quests, characters, and storytelling, long considered the game's strongest elements, are finally allowed to shine without being overshadowed by technical failures. The addition of Phantom Liberty has breathed new life into the game and offered a storyline that rivaled the best of CD Projekt Red's previous work. Discussion among players has turned to strategies and character builds, hidden stories, and moral dilemmas, which is a far cry from glitch compilations and angry reviews that dominated the conversation at launch. And for many, the game transformed into an example of how dedication and perseverance can reshape a title's legacy. But no amount of patches, updates, or expansions can fully erase the memory of its disastrous launch. It remains a cautionary tale about the perils of hype and the consequences of releasing an unfinished product. Millions of players will never return, and for some, the sense of betrayal will never fade. The studio's hard-earned goodwill painstakingly built through the success of The Witcher, was forever tarnished. The game's journey from broken promises to redemption underscores the high stakes of modern game development and the cost of getting it wrong. Still, the game's ultimate legacy is more nuanced. While it always will be remembered for its troubled launch, it also stands as a testament to the potential for redemption in the gaming industry. CD Projekt Red's commitment to improving Cyberpunk over the years showed that, given time and resources, even a flawed product can be transformed into something worthwhile. Players and developers alike, it serves as both a warning and a source of hope. A reminder of what can go wrong when ambition outpaces execution, and proof that a game's story doesn't have to end at launch. The broader implications of Cyberpunk's journey extend beyond the game itself. It offers valuable lessons for the entire industry. For developers and publishers, it puts the dangers of overpromising and the critical importance of delivering the finished product in full display. The crunch and pressure that led to the game's premature release serve as a cautionary tale, reminding the studios that player trust is fragile and can be shattered in an instant. Rushing a release to meet a deadline, even for a game with immense anticipation, can lead to long-term damage that far outweighs any short-term financial gain. For players, the story of Cyberpunk highlights the need for caution in the face of pre-release hype. Dazzling trailers, high-profile marketing, and glowing reviews might create excitement. They don't always reflect the reality of the final product. The game's eventual redemption offers a glimmer of hope. It shows that while a poor launch can severely damage a game's reputation, and the studio's reputation, it doesn't have to be the end of the story. With enough dedication, transparency, and effort, developers can repair the damage and create something that earns back the trust and admiration of players. Cyberpunk's long road to recovery reminds us that the life of a game doesn't end on launch day. Better or worse, games are living products that can evolve and improve over time, and sometimes even a shattered promise can be rebuilt. Perhaps the ultimate legacy of Cyberpunk is the duality of his narrative. A stark warning about the dangers of overhyping corporate pressure, but also an inspiring example of redemption through persistence and humility. It shows that while launches are critical and first impressions often last, they don't have to define a game's entire lifespan. Behind every ambitious promise lies the risk of failure, but also the possibility of recovery when a developer commits to making things right. For players, Cyberpunk 2077 stands as a reminder to temper expectations and demand better launches, but also to remain open to the potential of growth and improvement. For CD Projekt Red is a hard-earned lesson in the cost of ambition and the resilience required to honour the promises made to their audience. Once it had a troubled birth, but now Night City finally shines brilliantly, proof of what can come from failure combined with persistence. If you found this breakdown useful, give the video a like and consider subscribing for more deep dives into the stories behind the games we play. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.